China has a plan to take over the world. What can we do to stop it? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. If we don't stop them now, the Chinese Communist Party will take over the world. That's the conclusion of a new book, The Concentration of Power, Institutionalization, Hierarchy, and Hegemony. I sat down with the author, Anders Corr, to discuss how China has been taking over international institutions while the U.S. sat back and let it happen, and what we can do about it now. Anders, thanks for joining me in person. This is just like the before times.
Yeah.
So your new book, The Concentration of Power. I guess, what is concentration of power?
The book argues that there's over thousands of years of history. There's a concentration of power from tribes to kingdoms, states and empires, growing bigger geographically.
TikTok influencers,
yeah. The more people that watch you, the more people will watch you in the future.
I always took it as like, a Tinkerbell thing. Like she needed people to clap for her. I need people to watch, otherwise I cease to exist.
I believe that's true, yeah.
Well, so how does the concentration of power apply to China and what's happening with like the UN or the EU?
China is, as one of the biggest and most concentrated forms of power globally, if you think about it, Xi Jinping has power over a massive economy that, by some measures, GDP purchasing power parity, is bigger than the U.S. economy, is bigger than the European economy. So all of that power tends to aggregate more power. Xi Jinping has the ability as a gatekeeper to control who comes into the country, and he's using that very effectively to aggregate more power. He's using that to control what people do in terms of things like Taiwan or South China Sea, the Olympics and whatnot.
So a lot of people talk about how, essentially what we're seeing in the world now is like another Cold War, where you sort of have the United States as the arbiter of like the liberal democracy kind of world order, bashing up against the Chinese Communist Party. So this is kind of what you talk about in your book, about different hierarchies of power and each one trying to see which one is the strongest.
That's right. And it is, I do see it as a Cold War. I think it's much more dangerous today than the old Cold War because China's economy is much bigger, is much more powerful than the old Soviet economy. And China is able to steal through technological industrial espionage much more data globally from us and from the Europeans than the Soviets were ever able to do.
And I guess, you talk about China's economic power. They're also making a huge push to become military power as well.
Absolutely. The economic power is what feeds into the military power. So when we allow China to extract economic power by giving them free access to U.S. and European markets, we're really complicit and enabling their military.
And then they can use that military to, say, seize control of the South China Sea and tax shipping there and use that money to fuel their military even more. So it kind of cycles up.
Exactly.
So what are some of the specific tactics China is using to outcompete the U.S.? I mean, you mentioned like intellectual property theft, but there's international institutions like the UN. We'll just go through some of the ways.
Well, I think one of the most concerning ways and effective ways that it's gaining power is by compromising elites around the world. It's called elite capture. Mm-hmm. And we see it, I think the most clear and least talked about example is Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden got a 3-carat diamond from a CCP operative. He got, he was doing millions of dollars of business in China. He was working with John Kerry's son to do business in China. John Kerry, according to some reports, still has business interests in China. And John Kerry is incredibly influential on all things China because he's in charge of the climate change negotiations. So we're in a very difficult position. And this is not unlike what the CCP does to third world countries in Africa. They compromise third world countries in Africa, in the Philippines, for example, through doing millions of dollars worth of business with the children, with the business associates of the leadership of these countries. And that's how they influence these countries to vote with China at the UN, for example.
Well, so in your book, you talk about how power inevitably coalesces, it concentrates in different places. So does that mean it's inevitable that China takes over the world?
I think there's a trend in the direction towards more authoritarian power, towards bigger states, bigger empires. So China is well placed to take over the world. It's obvious. Everyone knows that they're seeking global hegemony. Rush Doshi has written about it in Oxford University Press, so it's establishment belief now. But I don't think it's inevitable. I think that if we realize what's happening soon enough, thanks to your show and thanks to other important work by other scholars like yourself, if we become alert to this fact quickly enough, and if we take strong enough action quickly enough, I think we can stop it. But we really have to get much more serious.
Well, so I guess that's the question. Like, China is trying to take over the world. The cards are on the table, the writing's on the wall, other prescient analogies. Why isn't more being done to stop them? I mean, things are changing, definitely, but like what should the United States be doing?
I think we should be limiting access of China much more seriously to our technology, to our economy. I think we should be limiting access of China to the European economy. I think we should be kicking China out of our international organizations like the UN and WTO. It's, a country that's committing a triple genocide against Uyghurs, Falun Gong, and Tibetans should never be allowed to be in polite company. Their diplomats should be excluded from all international organizations.
Well, so how would that be possible? Like, as far as I know, the WTO has no process for kicking a member out. How could we kick China out of the UN?
Well, just refuse them visas. You refuse their diplomats visas. If the U.S., Switzerland, Italy, and France all refuse Chinese diplomatic visas, they would have a very hard time operating at the UN because most of the UN organizations are in those three countries.
Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about is just a much more amplified, aggressive approach to China.
If you're not aggressive with China, China will be aggressive with you.
So, well, then I guess the question is, if the United States or, whatever you want to call this other system of power, this other hierarchy of power that's fighting against the Chinese Communist Party, what would happen if they are successful? What would then the world look like?
I think then we could go back to a more democratized, sovereign system. I mean, the way in which the UN system was originally envisioned by the British, by Churchill and FDR back in 1942 when the Atlantic Charter was written, was a world of sovereign states, territorial integrity, progress towards more human rights, towards more democracy. These are the founding principles of the United Nations. We could go back to that if we defeated the CCP. Currently, the CCP is trying to use the UN against these principles. And they're liars. I mean, they claim to be a democracy. It's very clear that they're liars. They claim to be promoting the UN principles. It's very clear that these are all lies. We have to wake up to this, and we have to take much stronger action now. Otherwise, the concentration of power will continue, as it currently is.
Well, so then what does that world look like where China has won?
I think it would look like China. I mean, that's the best thing we can imagine. So you would have not 3 genocides, you would have hundreds of genocides all over the world.
Do you think China would lead to actual ethnic cleansing in other parts of the world?
Absolutely. If anyone who there are hundreds of religions around the world, small religions, and they would all be wiped out. There are thousands of languages, they would all be wiped out. China wants a very homogenous political system that's communist and that's Han Chinese.
Well, so I think many Americans would probably have a hard time understanding this. Like, for example, if China does become the dominant power, like, how would they stop, for instance, this show or any show criticizing the Chinese Communist Party on YouTube or, on the internet?
All of you guys would be put in a re-education camp. There would be no more show.
But how would that happen? Like how would China be able to tell the United States to put me into a re-education camp?
Well, if China was able at some point down the road to have, say, a stronger military than the U.S., a stronger economy, if they were able to compromise the leadership of the U.S. and other democratic nations to such a point that they were turning them into communist countries, satellite countries of China. All you have to do is look at how did Moscow subordinate all of the Eastern European countries. They moved troops into them. They compromised their leaders in various ways. They put their leaders on the payroll, and they were fake sovereign countries. They were really answering to Moscow. And in all of those countries, religions were repressed, languages were repressed. Ukraine had horrible, horrible famines because Stalin just took all the grain out of the country and used it for his own purposes.
So you mentioned what the United States can do. That won't happen unless the American people demand it or want it. So especially since I'm feeling very involved in this now, like my neck is on the line, what can people watching do to head the currents of history in a different direction?
I would say one of the most important things we as Americans can do is demand that Washington, D.C. rid itself of political corruption through corporate influence of, you have Apple, Nike, Coca-Cola. They were all lobbying, spending millions of dollars on lobbying against the Uyghur Human Rights Act, against the new law that the House just passed to end forced labor of the Uyghurs. That should be illegal. You shouldn't be able to, use millions of dollars to lobby for slavery, essentially.
And so you think if the American people are united enough in demanding this kind of action, that the concentration of power would be in the hands of the American people?
It would help. It would help. It might help turn the tide. I mean, if we could make our government rational, then our government may be able to do something. And the way to make it rational is to remove the influence of all of the corporations that are doing business in China. They're making billions, $600 billion a year in trade with China, $2.3 trillion of institutional investments in China, including state pension funds. All of that money has a massive influence on our senators, on our House of Representatives, and on the president. All of that, the money, that Chinese money, all of those flows need to be, the influence that has over our politicians needs to be cut 100%.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Once again, that book is Concentration of Power. We'll put a link to that below.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
And thank you for watching this episode. We also did a more in-depth interview with Anders Corr on the China Unscripted podcast. I put a link to that below, so be sure to check it out. I've also linked to his new book, The Concentration of Power. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.